Hello, this is a speech for you. The title of this essay is "The Critics Are Wrong. A National Divorce Wouldn't Be in Russia or China's Interest." This was recently written by Louis Marinelli. I'm simply posting it to video because I think it's one of the best answers for this long, historied criticism of the Calexit movement that I've ever seen. So let me give you the response to this issue for a long time. Critics of a national divorce between America and the American states have no arguments in favor of the union itself. I have yet to hear a critic of national divorce lay out a case for how great our federalist system works, how great the federal government functions, how our system of checks and balances keeps one branch of government from usurping power from the other, or in general, how great our representative democracy works, either in terms of providing adequate representation or ensuring that the will of the people be done. These critics cannot point to, in defense of preserving the union, the cohesion of our diverse population, of the purity of our political leaders, public trust in any of the branches of government, faith in our elections, or the overall direction of the country itself. And none of these critics can put forth a compelling argument as to why, hypothetically speaking, an independent country today would have to give up its sovereignty to join the union as the next state if given the opportunity. Although all politics is local, critics of national divorce instead turn their attention outward. They argue that America's two primary geopolitical adversaries, Russia and China, would benefit if the United States were to break up. These critics claim Russia and China would like to see the collapse of the United States, as if a population of 330 million people would suddenly vanish from the earth, leaving the Russians and the Chinese in a prime position to fill the resulting void. What these critics fail to realize is that national divorce, or the advocacy thereof, is not the source of political divisiveness and instability in North America. It is the solution, in fact. If Russia and China want political instability and divisiveness in North America in hopes that it provides them the opening that they need to conquer the world, they should advocate for the preservation of the United States and its union of 50 states. Political divisiveness and instability they need is going on now. That is exactly what exists now. The United States is a unified country, and it is what we will continue giving them so long as we remain under the same roofs of a house that is divided. Like many couples in bad relationships often form positive, cooperative, and more cordial relationships after divorce, the American states will also have better relationships among themselves after a national divorce because they will no longer be interfering with each other's domestic affairs. In America's former blue states, the right will no longer pose a threat to women's reproductive rights, transgender rights, and efforts to combat climate change, while the left will no longer pose a threat to the right to bear arms, traditional classroom instruction, or funding for police departments. The left can have a field day implementing progressive tax regimes as they see fit to lift out minorities and other communities out of poverty and disenfranchisement. And the right can set out a grand experiment to prove that Reagan was right and trickle-down taxation works. Liberals and conservatives will have a government that represents their values and live in more ideologically homogenous populations, which will produce governments that work better as a result. Political divisiveness and animosity in society will subside as the populations of these new separate countries will have little to disagree about, aside from healthy differences of opinion on the particulars of random policies in general. Civil discourse will return as the populations of these new separate countries will largely agree in principle on the most important issues of the day and be able to reach compromise without compromising their own inherent values that they hold dear in their own states. What divides us now in a so-called united country are not hot button cultural social issues about which we hold diametrically opposed worldviews. It's everything. We are so divided about so many issues, and divorce is the only way to bring us to a reasonable conversation and dialogue into the future. Without gridlock standing in the way of what each side considers progress, and without the political divisiveness and animosity in society that makes civility and compromise almost undoable these days, the American states after this divorce, now independent of each other and free to set their own domestic policies, will have a better relationship with one another, resulting in more stability and less division, and a greater willingness to cooperate on global issues where the American states still share ground. In this context, if we were to, for the sake of argument, accept the idea that Russia and China want only instability and divisiveness in North America in hopes of creating a void for them to fill in the absence of the United States, we can argue then that Russia and China would want the United States to remain together in a perpetual Cold Civil War. Obviously, an honest assessment of the situation leads us to understand that a national divorce between the American states, red and blue, is not in Russia or China's interest. To underscore that conclusion, one must consider what Russia and China want in terms of foreign relations. Ideally, when dealing with an adversary such as the United States, Russia and China want to understand that its adversary, its capabilities, its strengths, its weaknesses, and its general overview of how it sees things. Russia and China currently understand the United States for American foreign policy generally doesn't change from administration to administration. Democrat and Republican presidents are merely opposite legs of the same march in foreign policy that the U.S. government pursues, no matter who's in charge, decade after decade. That's the way these other countries see it. This means the United States is generally predictable adversary, is a generally predictable one. Russia and China basically understand what the United States is, what the United States stands for, and what it's prepared to do, to stand against, or up to. It understands what its priorities are and where its loyalties lie. Upon this information, Russia and China develop their global strategies and formulate their foreign policies. Another reason Russia and China would prefer the United States to remain together is because a national divorce between the American states will require these two countries to reassess their entire foreign policy approach towards North America and the rest of the world, since a national divorce will produce new countries whose foreign policies towards Russia and China will inevitably differ from the established and predictable foreign policy of the U.S. government over the last 60 years. The issue can be examined from an economic point of view in addition, in tandem. Critics say China would benefit from a national divorce between the American states, but they do not provide specifics as to why that would be the case. There are reasons, however, to reject that premise. First, the American people are one of the world's largest, if not largest, consumers of products made in China. National divorce will not send 330 million Americans to Mars. They will still be living in North America and purchasing products made by the People's Republic. But a national divorce will require the Chinese to negotiate new trade deals with the newly adopted independent American states, some of which inevitably will adopt a more hardline approach on environmental human rights issues in China, whereas Washington does not. That's not good for China. Basically, what they mean is that California constantly pursues human rights abuses, and California even sued Chinese company for workers' rights because the company was operating here in California. The Chinese government did not like that. And independent California is going to be bound into international trade with China and constantly complaining about their human rights abuses and labor abuses, which the American government today won't do. So that's actually against China's will. Secondly, and this issue is tied to the first, the United States is one of China's major sources of jobs for Chinese people throughout the outsourcing of American jobs to China. Jobs for Chinese workers to provide for their families is a crucial pivot and piece of the Chinese government for maintaining order in their country and staying in power. National divorce would threaten this lifeline of employment, considering that some of the newly independent American states, particularly the conservative ones, would inevitably adopt a more mercantilist economic approach and offer companies incentives to return home from China, or not outsource jobs in the first place, whereas Washington does not. That's not good for China. What they're saying is that if you have states that become independent, they may appear to lower workers' rights and regulations and therefore make it competitive in their state to produce goods that are cheaper than China's. They can't do that now because the regulatory framework and the human rights framework for America is across all 50 states and at the federal level. If certain states broke off, they might have right to work policies. They may get rid of the minimum wage, and they might be able to be competitive. Remember, before China started taking off, America was moving jobs to the mercados, maquiladoras on the Mexico border. So Mexico was marginally cheaper than America, and jobs were going there. China reduced their costs lower than Mexico so they could compete. Why won't that competition apply to other states if they were independent? Not good for them. If we accept the power of money, the influence of globalism, and the principles of interdependence between China and the United States, then we must also accept that a national divorce between the American states would only threaten Chinese coffers with a loss of tax revenues, complicate trade relations with its most important foreign market, and risk jobs for millions of Chinese workers, potentially fomenting unrest in China. How would that be in China's interest? It obviously wouldn't be. And as far as Russia goes, if we listen to the critics of national divorce, the last thing they want is the product of national divorce: positive, cooperative, and more cordial relations between Americans. America's divided right now. We're ripping each other apart. We're tearing each other at the throat. we can't pass any legislation. We can't even cohesively fight against Russian interference in the election. We can't cohesively come together as a people to talk about how Afghanistan was botched. You have a failed empire on the world stage who can't seem to get anything done, can't seem to agree with itself, and can't seem to even pass a budget. How's that not in Russia and China's interest right now? If we were separated and divided, and we did have more cordial relations, we would all operate better. There would be no internal division in America. There would be a more cohesive view as to how to do things, and America would be able to react more quickly. Additionally, you'd have a new California front pushing for even harsher regulations with China, something that America wants. These things need to be considered when we're looking at the evaluations of what happens with secession. No one talks like this, and that's why we're bringing this to you. If you want to talk about the threats of Calexit, please consider this. These are rational points, and that's what we aim to do here at Yes California. Make sure that you have a rational discussion. Thank you.